and their tenant burnt down the house. Like, he literally like tried to kill us. He stacked all of his furniture in the middle of the room, poured kerosene on it, and fucking lit it, and then put forks in all the outlets, right? And lit the house on fire with all of us in it. And
You have
the
a
cops,
lot more arson in your life than most people. I just want you to know that.
would you look at that? Got a hat. We got ourselves a shirt. We're doing some prototyping just so then later on down the road, if the channel picks up, we'll be able to know what companies we want to work with, what companies we don't want to work with. I think it looks pretty swell, and I think you should like it too. I would like to welcome you to After Rot. It's the afterthoughts to the Thought Rot podcast, where we can go back and revisit topics that happen within the podcast, maybe elaborate on our story, maybe share pictures, maybe go into more depth, and really kind of solidify a standing point. Or maybe we didn't get something right when we were talking about something and we need to revisit it so we can correct our mistakes. This is what After Rot's going to be all about. But I think that's enough of an intro. Let's get right into After Rot. Now, before we can get into the fun stuff like this or this, we're first going to have to do a disclaimer. This is still an ongoing police investigation. I do this because you'll understand later, but we have to respect that. So I will not be using the name of the arson setter. I will not be using any of the names of the kids that are in the house, and I will not be using my parents' names just out of respect for them. You'll get to know me, and I'll explain some things along the way. But other than that, this is still an ongoing police investigation, and that's about it. I just can't really say too much about the actual people, but I'm going to tell you my experiences and how I came to experience, almost being killed in a house fire. For real. Start off our story, we should probably start at the very beginning. Way back when I was a little wee person trying to grow up in Kelowna, BC. I just retired from the military due to an injury, and they had moved me back to BC, but it wasn't working out. Here's the thing, it didn't work out because it was simply just too many homeless people. The actual house where I lived in, there was 3 wet shelters within 1 block of my house, and a wet shelter, if you didn't know, is somewhere that they can go legally do their and drink. And then they go and leave that wet shelter where there's zero supervision, and then they go rob everybody around them. And I was getting really tired of my kids being not safe to go to school, not safe at home because they're breaking into our houses every week. So we decided to pick up everything and move to Alberta. Driving our ways 13 hours during the height of the pandemic, we arrived in Alberta at my parents' house, where we then met their tenant, who I'm going to call the Angler because he's actually featured in a lot of fishing magazines because he's a professional fisherman. Meeting the Angler, he seemed like a nice guy. He had a severe disability where he had muscle sclerosis or whatever it was. His muscles tightened up and then he couldn't walk. So he'd often take medication to fix that issue, and that's where the problem would start. At first, the Angler was great. We sat out in the sun and we enjoyed talking to him. He had lots of fishing stories. I told old, put your helmets on, boys, here's a basic story. And we would just sit back and relax. Often he would sit there having a coffee and a couple cigarettes, and I'd just watch the kids play with his dog out in the yard. One day, the Angler came home and said that his disease was really affecting him, and he said that to my dad he was going to be taking his medication. The medication he would be taking that night is right there. Which isn't probably prescribed by your doctor. Now, obviously, my dad does not have any control over another grown man. Does my dad want drugs in his house? No. Does my dad want that done there? No. But what can he do? So he just kind of let it happen, and that was the biggest mistake that we made in this entire story. At first, when the Angler went and did his thing to take his medicine, everything was fine. I saw him a few more times out in the day, just kind of, living life, I guess would be the best way to describe it. He was in a really good mood and he was talking. We obviously didn't let my kids go near him, nor did we really play with his dog or anything. We just kind of let him stand on his deck and we stayed on our deck, and if we happened to cross paths, we were polite. I don't condone doing that kind of stuff, especially not around children, so I was a little bit more annoyed, but you know what? Put the kids inside, put on Paw Patrol, and we were okay. So I thought. Later in the evening, the Angler comes and bangs on the outside door of the house, screaming for my dad to come help him because somebody is following him around. So my dad went outside and he starts talking to the Angler, trying to calm him down. You need to go inside. You can't be out here screaming. It's late at night. We have kids sleeping upstairs. Enough's enough. Go back to bed, you little fisherman. The Angler, of course, had none of this and said that he was being followed around by a giant lifted black truck, even though he was inside of the house in the basement. I hate ghost trucks, but sometimes they just come into your house at the most inconvenient times, like when you take your medicine for your muscle problem and then you end up thinking that you're gonna die. A little later in the night, I ended up going outside for a cigarette because I was a bad boy and I used to smoke. I am now 2 and a bit years clean and I don't smoke anymore because why? I like life, and life is good, especially when you live through a house fire. Anyways, when I saw him outside having a smoke, he seemed to have calmed down. Did I really want to talk to him? No, I was a little annoyed because of all the noise he'd been making throughout the rest of the night. But I have never personally done that certain type of medicine, and I didn't really know how it worked. So I just assumed, the medicine was over. He seems normal now. Boy, would I be wrong. Now, we're trying to think that everything's all good, but it's not. We didn't know the trouble that would be brewing very soon. But we were sitting around and we just made ourselves some tea before bed because, yes, we are a family that likes to sit around and watch some tea. We were just waiting for my mom to get home. The kids were already in bed. We usually sit around with her for half an hour, find out how her day is going, and then we would all go to bed and wake up and start our day anew the next day. We were all sitting around waiting for that to happen when we heard a bunch of yelling outside. My dad told me to stay inside with the kids. He would then go outside and he finds the angler casting his line over at the neighbor's house, screaming that the black truck had followed him over there, and he was, banging on the windows of that house saying he was going to unalive those people. To which there was no black truck inside their house, nor was there one in their driveway. So he was just doing whatever he wanted to do. This lady was home alone because her husband was at work and was literally panicking in her house, and she called the police. That's the first police call. Just in case you guys are wondering why everybody's at work, a lot of people have night jobs, but here specifically in Alberta, there's a lot of people that have rig jobs, which means they're not home all the time. Often wives will be home or husbands will be alone instead for like 2-week stints, and then the husband and or wife comes home and then they're home for 2 weeks. So a lot of the wives in my area are alone at night because their husbands work on the rig, making what the angler's doing ever more scary. All right, let's get into the juicy of it. You guys are getting ready for it. So my mother comes home and we're all having our tea where we hear that familiar sound of the angler outside screaming that somebody's trying to unalive him and some black trucks following him around. To which my dad, wasting no time, storms out of the house this time as I'm trying to inform my mother what's been going on all night with the angler. My dad goes outside and he's yelling at the guy, and then he brings in the angler and gets him downstairs, to which I go outside for a smoke and the cop rolls up. I walk over to that cop and I'm talking to that cop, and he asks if we've seen somebody who's been breaking into houses. We try to explain to the police officer, it's our tenant, we're trying to keep him in the house, he won't stay in the house. And then another cop car rolls up, and another cop car rolls up, and another cop car rolls up. This guy, the angler, had run around the town banging on so many houses, and every time that a phone call came in, they sent out a different squad car. So there was like 11 squad cars outside of the house while me and my dad are trying to discuss what's going on. My dad's trying to explain to them like, hey, this guy did a bunch of special medicine that wasn't prescribed by a doctor. We don't know what to do. We don't do that stuff. Can you help us? To which the police were like humming and hawing. And then the angler came out with some news. For the sake of this news, we're going to call my dad the mechanic. So the angler comes out and he goes, mechanic, there's a fire. Mechanic, there's a fire. To which the mechanic turns around, my dad, and says, go back to your room, angler. We're done with you, kind of thing. But the angler just laughs and goes, there's a fire. To which my mom walks out onto the balcony and she goes, can I see you, Adam? I need your help with something. So I walk in and she goes, we smell smoke. And as soon as you walked into the house, you could smell smoke. Yet there was nothing going on. But then the light started to do this like supernatural, like get Sam and Dean to pour salt around you kind of thing in the house. And I was like, oh crap. So I go inside and I'm going to show you a picture here of the staircase that I was going to go down. All photos you're about to see are all taken after the fire, because why would we have taken a picture of a staircase or a random door if it wasn't already burnt all to crisp? There's no reason to do it. So every picture you're going to see is going to be after the fire. Some pictures look better than others because of where the fire burned, but you'll see basically the layout of the house, and I can really explain what actually happened here. So this staircase that you're looking at here was actually like an entire like column of smoke coming up the stairs. But at the top of the stairs, there's obviously a fire door to stop like fire from coming from downstairs to upstairs. So when I opened that door, it just billowed into the upstairs, to which I then told my wife, get the kids and get out of the house. And then they started to do that process. I tried to make my way downstairs that way, but I couldn't because it was such a foul smelling smoke. And there's a reason for that. The angler had used a few different types of methods to start his fire. The first method was he piled all of his furniture and all of his blankets and all of his garbage and food into the middle of the room, which would have been directly underneath of my kid's bedroom. And he had lit that on fire by pouring some sort of accelerant on it. We did have a gas dog come in, or what is it, a sniffer dog come in, and they found 4 or 5 different types of accelerant. Some of them were blatantly obvious and some of them were very hidden. Like gas is obvious, but then other forms of like different types of, like, he had those like wood logs where they like light, and it's to help you like light a fire out in the woods and it burns for a very long time. He had that kind of like in the center of the garbage. Then he also had used forks in the outlets, so then those would melt and then drake down the wall. And he had used his element on his stove to cause like paper fires by putting the curtains over top of the elements and lighting them on fire. I'm going to give you a quick montage where we talk over here so you guys can see all the different areas of the damage. And I'm kind of curious to see if you guys are like, I don't know, amateur firefighters and able to tell how each fire started. The outlet ones are a bit darker and you can kind of, sometimes you can see the outlet. You can definitely see where the curtain ones were. But then we're going to talk about the scariest part about this whole story. Okay, so let's pick off where we left off. I had opened up the door, realized that the smoke was coming up the stairs, told my wife to get the kids out of the house. Now, as I helped her do that, we get the kids out of the house. We then go back in, me and my mom and my wife. We get the animals out of the house, which there was a lot of. It was a family of 5 with 2 dogs and a cat trying to get out of the house, as well as their family of 2 with their cat, right? And we're all trying to get out of the house and then make sure everyone's safe. We didn't have leashes, we didn't have anything, so it was pure chaos. When we get outside after getting the dogs out of the house, I hear my dad screaming to get the fire extinguisher. So I look, I go inside, I grab the fire extinguisher because the smoke's pretty heavy upstairs, but you can still kind of see. And then I head down through the outside, so the tenant's access door, the angler's door to get into his house. I head down those stairs and I go inside. And the fire is contained in the kitchen, which you're probably seeing in the actual pictures. There's a stack of garbage in the middle of the room, and then most of the fire's over on the wall, but the pile of garbage in the middle of the room is just kind of smoldering there. I start to get my dad out of the house because there's only one fire extinguisher. We don't need to be there. He heads up the stairs, and then I get to see the tenant's dog is locked in a cage in beside the fire there. So I let the dog out, which is clearly like panicking, and it bites at us and then rips up the stairs to go find its owner. It's scared, and we understand that. Then I go and I start trying to put the fire out on the wall, which I thought I was making headway, but according to the firefighters later in the fact, I was just dumb, which today, still to this day, I say the dumbest decision I ever made was to go down in that basement at all. And my dad was just as dumb for going down there too. So anyways, I'm down there, I'm trying to put out this fire, but a cop came in through the staircase door, which you've seen a couple times in the pictures. That staircase is on the inside of the house, and when he opened that door, the fire just went across the whole room. The whole room engulfed all at once because the outside door where the other cop was coming in had been open, which created like this vacuum effect. And I always thought that it was fake, that in movies, when the whole thing flashes over, that was just like for us to enjoy and think was like, oh my God, that's crazy. No, that is a very real thing, and it's called a flashover. What I just remember was hearing the door open, and then everything got super bright. I remember seeing the flames in front of me about a good 10-15 feet, and all of a sudden it was just like the whole roof all the way over. Everywhere around me was super hot, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see, even though the door of the tenant's door was only 5 feet, maybe 6 feet over to my left. In my brain, I had lost the entirety of the room. I didn't know where I was anymore. Luckily, that cop that was coming down the stairs behind me grabbed me by the hair and just dragged me out of the room, which when I got to the top of the stairs, it's like, you pulled me out by my hair kind of thing. And he was just like, yeah, but you're alive kind of deal. It was just the craziest thing. Every time I think about that fire, I always just think about how fast it moved from over here to around me, right? And then later, and this is a bit ahead of the story, but I was talking to the firefighters later. This is a few days later when they were inspecting the house for arson. I was talking to them, and they said the most deaths that they see is actually people right beside a door, like right by where the exit would be, right by where the window to get out is, because they can't figure out where they are. And by the time they do figure out where they are, they're so disorientated and they breathed in so much smoke they can't get out. So that was a crazy fact to me, because I believe it. I was 5 feet from the door, and I had zero idea where that door was or how to get back there, because I was just so, it was hot, it was sweating, it was bright, like you couldn't see, you couldn't breathe, you couldn't feel anything because obviously it's on fire. So how do you find your way out when you have no senses? I wouldn't have been able to, and if that cop didn't do that, I'd be dead today. On fire, and my kids are screaming, and this guy, the angler, is out there, and he's literally screaming at the mechanic, my dad, that my dad was chasing him, my dad didn't believe him about the truck, and yada yada yada. And he ends up starting to throw hands with my dad, who, you know, throw hands back, but not like really throwing hands back. Anyways, the cops separate them, but they don't stop the angler from doing anything. They just kind of let him walk away, to which he then turns his sights onto my daughter and walks up to her and starts screaming at her. Now, my daughter is very young. She's just in kindergarten, grade 1, and he's screaming at her like, I wish you had died, blah, 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 to which I'm getting pissed off, but Mama Bear steps in, the grandma steps in, starts screaming at him, to which he turns his sights on her and starts saying, I wish you died, you deserve to die, B, and all this other stuff. And it was crazy. The cops just kept letting him do this. They never stopped him, not until he randomly decided to push an officer. Like 20 minutes after all these incidents happened, did they finally put him in cuffs and in the back of the car. But by that time, my kids were already traumatized. I was already ready to unalive this whole situation. My dad was losing his mind. The house is on fire, and we're trying to get the firefighters over there. Now, luckily, because of all those cop cars that showed up, the cops were able to keep the fire under control-ish with the fire extinguishers that come in their cruisers, which we do thank them for doing that. Now, another fun thing to note about this story is that our actual neighbors across the road is part of the fire department. So my dad was over there after dealing with, the angler trying to fight him, and then eventually him getting arrested, banging on the door to get him up so he would go and deal with it. We're a very small town, so it's all a volunteer base. It just so happened that calling 911 when the cops are already there wasn't going to work, and they had called the next town over's fire department, which is 10-15 minutes away on a good day. And so my dad just banged on the door, and eventually our neighbor gets up and he goes and gets the fire department rallied up. They show up, and it was crazy and cool at the same time how, without even thinking, these people don't know you, they don't owe you anything. They get out of their truck, they put on a helmet, and they charge into your house without even thinking about what's going on in there. Right, this guy just set fire to the whole house. He's clearly unstable. He clearly planned this out by stacking everything and all the accelerants they found later during their investigation. This was a well thought out plan that this guy had. Yet these firefighters just charged straight in there. And that was absolutely astonishing to see at the time. Cool at the same time, because it was like they didn't care. There was men, there was women, they didn't care. They just got in and just did it. Same with the cop just charging down the stairs to get me out of the fire. Same with him. Like, that's just doing it. That is raw instinct. And at the end of the day, if they perish because they're saving your house, that's what they signed up for, and that's nutty. So I have respect for firefighters for sure, especially because after all this was said and done, that same firefighter's family took my family in and fed us meals for the next couple months while I looked to buy a place, which is the current place you're looking at right now. I bought this house to house the 7 people from that fire, and it's just crazy to think that in a big town you never would have gotten that. In a place like Kelowna, BC, you never would have gotten that. But here, the whole town was out there delivering food. They dropped off money. It was mental. It was just a really cool experience staying in a small town and seeing how they reacted, because when we were getting robbed constantly in Kelowna, nobody cared. When people's houses were burning down and on the news, nobody cared. The difference between a big city to a small city to a small town is amazing. Like, the community here is great. But what happened to the angler, you ask? Well, he got arrested that night and he went to the jail cell, where he then got his drunken disorderly charge, but nothing to do with the arson or anything. No, they hadn't done that investigation yet. So they let the angler go the next day, right? Where he then came right back to the town we lived in, but stayed down the road. He never came back to the house. Obviously, he would not have made it. And he stayed down the road. We knew he was down there, but during the time that he was down there, he kind of just snuck out of the province, and the cops were like, well, what are we gonna do? There's a whole invisible line right there. I know he tried to kill your family. I know that we said it was attempted murder. I know that we said it was deliberately set. I know that we said that there was obvious signs of accelerants all around the house. I know he stacked all the furniture under your kid's bedroom, but he crossed an invisible line, so now we can't go get him. So this guy did all this, and he got to go free. He just walked away. He literally just did that. He just walked across a line, and the cops went, we don't need to go find him. And that's why I never talk, I don't feel good about the police. My entire life changed because of that guy, but I could not have had a life. He could have killed one of my kids or all my kids. He could have killed my dog. He could have killed my parents. And this guy does all that, and because he crossed an invisible line, he gets nothing. And that's why I never talk about the police, and when I do, I get really freaking mad because of that situation. And no matter how many times we've tried to pursue charges, they have always just kind of been like, what do you want us to do? Even though we are the RCMP and we're Canada wide other than Ontario, we just can't go get them. We can't do it. So it's now been 4 years since that fire, and he is living his best life. He still makes YouTube videos on his YouTube channel about fishing. He still writes for his fishing magazine. He still collects his pension, and he still does everything like his life has never changed, even though he almost killed a bunch of people because of his actions. And that's where this story ends. I do have more about this story, but I can't really talk about it. I can only share my experiences and what I saw, and that's basically the way it is. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed the first episode of After Rot, the After the Thought Rot podcast breakdowns of different stories. Sometimes there won't be a lot of episodes. Sometimes the After Rot will just be about a topic in the real world. After Rots for smaller form videos where we're not going into a full podcast length, or if we just want to expand on a story and or a moment in the podcast. Sometimes you'll see my beautiful face here, and sometimes you'll see Connor's, or maybe it'll be a guest on here. You'll never know, because I always like to expand on things. In a podcast format, you can talk for a very long time, but you might not get all the information out, and you can't readily throw in pictures wherever you want unless you really pre-script it. And I prefer to bring you guys a more natural flowing podcast than a really highly scripted, we have to get it by this time, by this time, by this time, and we'll finish in exactly 1 hour, 57 minutes, and 15 seconds. No, I like to just kind of roll with the punches, and if we need to expand, then that's what After Rot's for. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode of the Thought Rot podcast. Or maybe you'll see us over here on After Rot. It's fun to say words wrong. Bye.